problem around tribal and other Indigenous peoples' engagement with science and technology is this long history of the role of science and technology in the colonial project. And so people often, when they think about colonization, they'll think about missionaries, compulsory conversion to Christianity. They'll think about the disruption and the breakup of the tribal collective land base into allotments, and I would use the word incarceration of Indigenous people in boarding schools or residential schools, but they don't often think about the role of science and technology. And scientists themselves like to tell us that science brings truth and brings liberation, and the more knowledge we have, the better that we can live, and knowledge is for the good of everybody. But historically, the production of scientific knowledge has not been good for Indigenous people. Our lands, our bodies, our non-human relatives have been used as living laboratories for scientists to ask whatever question they wanted that often didn't serve our people, right? And that aided the building of this nation state in ways that produced institutions of learning and institutions of religion and institutions of governance that not only did not serve Indigenous people, but they were used to marginalize and oppress us. And so if we're going to engage with science and technology in ways that are useful for tribal sovereignty, for decolonization, we've got to do science and technology differently. And that means asking our own research questions. It means producing our own scientists and engineers to do the work that we need them to do on behalf of tribal sovereignty. I've become a big fan of actually training Indigenous scientists and engineers and people who are connected to their communities, because they will have both the local knowledge and connections to kind of work in a locally based way, but then they also need the scientific and technology training in order to handle those kinds of knowledges. And I think those kinds of people can move between those different knowledge systems and knowledge worlds and combine them in ways that will promote tribal sovereignty and the production of tribal governance and institutions, educational institutions. I have really moved away from focusing on improving mainstream institutions, even though I'm a professor in a mainstream institution, to thinking about how we appropriate those resources, or if you want to say colonize the mainstream institution, pull those resources out and put them back into tribal or Indigenous communities. And we need to use them to build our own educational institutions, our own governance structures. We need to train our own scientists to ask the questions that we want to ask. And sometimes Native scientists might want to ask questions about our health conditions, or our land, status of our land, or our water quality, but our scientists may also want to ask questions about mainstream society. What's wrong with them that they're making the kinds of policies that are affecting us in such negative ways? What kinds of biases and assumptions do they have? So we don't only need to study ourselves, we need to study the dominant society, because they're the ones causing us problems in the first place. That's what happens in the process of colonization, right? And I think like we have social scientists, like we have teachers, like we have people that are going into medical fields, we need people doing basic science and technology research. We don't have enough people doing that. I think we have a lot of Indigenous people tracked away from doing science and engineering. And that's got a lot to do with the capacities of schools to train them appropriately, right? When you get to the university to do a science degree, you need the necessary prerequisites. And we don't often have a lot of that in rural school systems. So there's a class dimension as well that's inhibiting our people from having the course prep that they need to do this work when they do get to the university level. And I'm really interested in us figuring out how we prepare our people to do that kind of work. Not only to become teachers, right? Not only to become, go into careers towards which we've already been tracked. And it's not just Indigenous people, right? A lot of people living in rural areas, we do not have the necessary, I think, lab facilities in our high schools. We know this nationally in the United States. We have a shortage of math and science teachers. We've got a shortage of people of color doing math and science. We've got a shortage of women. We need to figure out how to get a more diverse workforce doing science education and doing basic scientific research. So I'm all in favor of the kinds of programs that target women and people of color and Indigenous people in order to get us to do more science and engineering. And you see those programs at multiple levels. They've got them in grade school, junior high, high school, university level. Those are really great. And so we really do need to make sure we're developing programs that are not tracking our students away from science and technology fields, and at all levels. And so I think there's still room for improvement in that area. And that'll make a big difference in terms of getting people into those degrees and then getting them out and getting them to go to graduate school, becoming scientists or science advisors for Indigenous communities.